into a neighborhood next to Kirtland Air Force Base, much farther than previously thought.
The Water Authority Board will hear the latest on the risks from that spill that's spreading through the ground in the Southeast Heights.
What's it really going to take to get this fuel spill cleaned up as quickly and as efficiently as possible?
One of our delegates from New Mexico, Southwest Organizing Project, spoke to how millions and millions of jet fuel have spilled in Kirtland Air Force Base. More fuel has spilled and leached into the aquifers of neighboring communities than the Axton Valdez, and yet those conversations aren't being had.
They diminished and have continued to diminish what they've done to the earth. That we have 24 million gallons sitting on top of an aquifer, that's not a small deal.
I do believe that it's an act of genocide because if you're killing off our land, you're killing off our people. I mean, ultimately, it's as simple as that.
They're just masking it by giving you small compliments of the situation so that, it would take people off of thinking, man, it's what I'm eating, it's what I'm doing. No, it's that you're in an area where it's contaminated. You're living in contaminant.
Okay. Rolling camera A, rolling camera B. So just help me visualize. Okay, so 470 feet is where this was, because
that's where the aquifer starts.
Okay.
So if you take the tallest bank building in downtown Albuquerque, it's 320
yes.
feet. 1.5 of those under feet. That's
okay.
where the water table starts.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And this contamination is at the top of that in a dissolved phase, very low concentrations.
Okay.
Okay.
Us being there created a presence of community. But I feel like traditionally and over the last couple of years, while this is how the Air Force counts their community engagement, it's not very friendly to the public. The information that they're giving, it's a lot of technical information, and the fact that they basically leave it up to the community to ask these, scientists who've been conditioned to talk about the spill since in 2011. There's a lot of mistrust with the public, and so these events really aren't the best kind of engagement that we would call for our community members, since we work with a lot of folks in that area. And I felt like the open house, it's what a lot of my community members and folks I've worked with would call like a dog and pony show, which is basically means that they have all their information ready. They're ready to answer what they would call pointed questions. And it's a whole lot of information that is basically secluded in one area.
So there's contaminated soil all through there. So we did what's called a soil vapor extraction, which is basically you put probes down and vacuum it up. And so when you vacuum all that stuff up, generally you're going to get the lighter stuff. And so we pulled the equivalent of 750,000 gallons. You're talking, that's actually where the pipe leaked. There's gravel, and it would just poke a hole in it every time the train came through. So we had 4 of these, and it was a really slow leak over long. So the main contaminant, EDB, was in leaded gasoline. So leaded gasoline was phased out in 1975. We found this in 1999. So it was leaking for 25 years.
that. I'm also really curious, so I also want to know, like, you know, where are people being impacted by the, you know, this plume? So this is the only place we've tested for ethylene dibromide.
And honestly, like, there are some gardens up in that area directly above the jet fuel spill, and we can't say for sure if you're growing directly in the ground that your food will be safe. And, you know, that's sad and unfortunate.
This is an issue of resources, of classism, of poverty, of racism. The Environmental Health Department wasn't putting harsh regulations on Kirtland Air Force Base to have a timeline and also be regularly reporting to the community about the activity that they were doing to clean the spill.
That's a huge issue, you know. And that's something that the community has wanted them to do, is look at the environmental impact of the jet fuel spill, because we don't really know. You know, it's a little bit lazy, and I wish they would take that on as sort of like an investigative, you know, issue, but they don't see it that way, because when the Air Force Base says they have, you know, these different stages of plans and they're gonna, you know, look into this, not even necessarily do anything yet, then they're okay with that.
You know how hard it is to do Zoom when we live in this neighborhood? Every 5 minutes there's a plane. We're like, give me a minute, let the plane pass. So we started figuring out if the food was healthy and wondering about that from years ago when we found out about the jet fuel spill. They call it a plume, that I happened to live on top of when we found out about it. I think it was 2013. And we found out that there's a jet fuel plume underneath our feet. And we were trying to do gardening and stuff in the community, and we're like, well, how can we do the gardening if we don't even know if the food will be healthy and safe for people to eat? So living in the community, I did see people who would have rashes on their bodies, like my son was one of them. He would have these strange rashes that I had to take him to the hospital for. And it turned out to be a type of eczema. You know, that's kind of strange because we never had those issues before in our family. I've always wondering, like, what is in the water, what is in the soil, and until this day, I really don't know if it's safe.
The amazing thing about plants is that they use what's in the ground to create themselves and their fruit and the parts that we consume. So when we have these toxic things like ethylene dibromide that are in the soil that are really hard to break down, our plants will uptake that specific substance and incorporate it into their plant tissue, whether it's the leaves or the fruit that we're eating. And, you know, unfortunately, we can consume those things still.
The way that the Kirtland Air Force Base spill really connects with the community is it impacts people's sense of safety. You know, we know it's an environmental health issue, but it's like we've been told that the military is supposed to protect people, right? And people have lots of different opinions on how that works or doesn't work. But that's what we're told. And then they're the ones that are polluting our neighborhoods, possibly polluting our water, right? So again, you know, it's similar to what happens with policing, right? You think, you're told these people are supposed to keep you safe, but they're the ones that kill you. And so I think it crosses all of those things.
I want them to know that we're watching them, that we're watching them. We want to hold them accountable, but also we're going to keep doing our own thing. If they're not going to show us this independent testing, we need to show the independent testing.
I don't think they've been as transparent with the community here with like their progress or how much, like how many gallons that's been going in there. So like so I believe it was like over 40 years it's been spilling. I believe in the 50s they weren't aware of it. Sometimes in the 70s that's when they started coming out about like how many gallons a day, or was it like a year or something? And then after sometime in the 90s it stopped being so transparent. So I feel like there's not transparency with the community as to how much damage it's actually done or how much is in our water system. Can you pump it out? Can you still filter it out with one filtering system?
It's come across to the public as like, you know, we got it under control and everything's good. But if you have a leak for 20 years, it's really hard to convince people that you had it under control. So it doesn't raise people's confidence at all.
I just think it's a really good example of them just not really caring about this community. It's hard to pinpoint the exact outcome or the exact product of the military industrial complex here in the International District because of just how complex and how evolved it is. But we can see these effects of police violence and the daily bombers and jets and stuff that they're flying and, you know, spending millions of dollars on these things instead of helping us restore the soil so we could grow food.
Because the military has a long track record of harming the environment, I don't even think they care anymore of what happens to us in this community. But I wish they would.
I feel like it's been kind of delayed. Can't tell you why, but it definitely feels like if this was in a more popular city or state, it would have been taken care of way long time ago.
It is clear to me that this is environmental racism, that our communities that are most impacted, are most in danger, are largely communities of color, are largely single-parent households. The county runs a $700 million budget. For the large part, it includes things that we use every day: roads, infrastructure, lights, parks and rec, senior services, and including behavioral health and how we provide services to the community. You know, and I live in the home that I grew up in, and which is blocks away from Kirtland Air Force Base. So even before I was a commissioner, I was aware, and it's been there since the 80s. And it often, as a community member, it felt to me like it didn't become an issue until it was reaching the Ridgecrest area, or what I call the pockets of wealth in my neighborhood.
Yeah, I think if this was, you know, again, like Tanawan or Ridgecrest may eventually get impacted by this. I'm surprised they're not more upset, because my understanding is their well and the well that this is in overlaps. I'm surprised those folks aren't a little more upset. Maybe they're more comfortable with the answers that they're getting from the Air Force than we are. But I think just living so close, it's harder to be as relaxed about it now. If this turns out differently than what the Air Force says and plays out even a percentage of our worst fears, right? This is going to destroy water, you know, for generations to come.
And I hear that what SWAP was really trying to do was say, like, y'all need to take responsibility for this, you know, and you had the people and the lawsuit and all of that to be able to make that happen. And it's still not happening. So now you've got to keep moving forward too. Like, what can you do? What can be done next?
Oftentimes governments are will set some requirements that are the minimum. I've learned a lot already in government, right? We're gonna make sure there's checks and balances and that we're monitoring things, and a lot of things are put well on paper. Then it's just the people within the system supposedly monitoring the people within the system. And that's part of the reason why I wanna have a little team, both that we can be the most informed, right? And give out that information as much as we can to partner organizations, to individual community members that I'm trying to connect with in my district, of course, but for all the county. You can go across our county, you go across our state, where are the highest environmental injustices, the largest dump fields. They are in communities of color, they're in low-income communities, they're among single parents, they are among our elders. It frightens me for our future generations. New Mexico is a place that we love our community. The idea that we may not be able to exist here if we don't have access to clean water. It makes me feel urgent, it makes me want to act, and it makes me want to, demand resources.
It's been challenging with the jet fuel spill because it's been a letdown, right? Because nothing ever happened, and our people are still suffering. We still don't know if we can plant food or if it's healthy.
It's really unfair.
It's like, well, the cleanup process, again, thinking the way these people think, it's not just the property or the tangible thing. The cleanup process is, what are you doing to re-heal the relationship to the community? How do we hold people accountable to investing in our community? And we're not a throwaway community. We're not disposable people.
I've lost both my parents at a young age. They were both victims of their environment too. And they died at young ages because of the environment around us. And that's a tragedy that all of our communities are facing when we live in these areas that we love, but others continue to think that it's okay to poison and put toxins in our communities, or that somehow because we're paying less for our houses that it means that we can somehow live close to these toxins. I think the county has a role, the city has a role, our federal government has a role, the state has a role. It is everybody's responsibility to ensure the health and safety of our communities now and into the future.
We're gonna have to keep an eye on this. This is something that the next person in my position is going to have to continue to monitor. And we're going to have to continue to have this uphill battle. But the hope is it will raise the awareness and continue to put this issue at the forefront.
What I think people can do to raise more awareness about any issue is really talk to people in person. Talk to folks, and even just asking them the question, do you know that there's New Mexico's largest jet fuel spill in Southeast Albuquerque or in the International District?
All data is important, and we already know, we get spun so many ways to discredit what our communities already know, and people spend lots of money on research that just to tell us what we already knew about ourselves and our neighborhoods and our environment.
And I'm sometimes inspired that the community are still working to improve the neighborhood and working to improve things in the community.
There's still a lot of hope because we have amazing community members doing amazing work. Instead of planting things that humans and animals might consume that, could lead to these very severe cancers with very severe symptoms, then we could take actions like planting, sunflowers that don't produce seeds for the birds to eat, that will actually uptake the toxin and break it down over several generations. And so we have cool projects here in the International District, like Sunflowers for Change, for example, is just one project that aims to do just that, to remedy the soil so that we're not uptaking these toxic chemicals through our food.
Because we did mobilize and do things back then, we've continued to get other projects pushed through, going door to door and doing front yard gardens and lighting and farming and gardening.
Hopefully in a few generations of the plants, we can begin to grow food again, assuming that the Air Force Base also does their part in cleaning up the spill.
When we start to feel powerless, that's when we kind of let these things just kind of like wash away. And we kind of don't think about them, but they're still happening. It's happening under our soil. And whenever it happens to our land and our water, is going to happen to us. We're in it for the long haul. And unfortunately, with a lot of environmental issues like this, we have to continue to keep them at the forefront. We have to continue to keep these agencies accountable. Whoever's in office, it doesn't matter what party, it's our job to make sure like our community members are safe and getting what they need.
So yeah, we learned a lot. It's an experience. We live and learn, right? Learn from our mistakes. You wish the military would too, but